Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Fall Protection, Ladders, and Stairs on the Construction Site. Elevated work platforms, construction stairways, and ladders are a part of everyday life for construction workers and help them to perform tasks that otherwise would be difficult or impossible. However, these simple construction site components can be hazardous and have the potential for causing severe injuries when used or maintained improperly. Special attention towards fall protection, as well as stairway and ladder safety, is necessary in order to reduce or eliminate these hazards on the construction site. Employees using elevated work platforms, construction stairs, and ladders are exposed to hazards of falling and tripping and sustaining serious injuries each day on the job. They should be able to recognize the hazards prevented by different types of fall protection and the safety precautions necessary to safely build construction stairways and use ladders. Employees should be provided with and trained in the proper use of fall protection equipment to guard against injury. They should also be trained in the proper construction of stairways and safe use of ladders on the job site. During today's program, our presenter will cover the following: fall protection options, guardrails, fall protection equipment, and safety nets, guidelines for proper installation of construction stairways and handrails, and the safe and proper use of ladders on the construction site. The presenter for today's webinar is David Doddridge. David has over 50,000 hours of hands-on construction, building inspection, and consultation experience. As an expert, David provides attorneys with expert consultation services in the following areas: personal injury, construction accidents, OSHA, construction defects and damages, building codes, and building inspections. David performs site inspections, writes expert reports, and presents expert testimony. During this afternoon's presentation, we will take 2 question and answer breaks. If you have a question for David, please use the chat or Q&A feature found on the right-hand side of the screen to submit your questions to him. We encourage all attendees to submit questions throughout the presentation. The chat and Q&A features are found here. Tomorrow morning, I'll send out an email with a link to the archived recording of this program. We do ask that you take time to fill out the survey that will appear on your screen after today's webinar is over. I now invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy. I'm going to turn the presentation over to our distinguished presenter, David Doddridge. David, the presentation is now all yours.
Thank you, Matt. Welcome, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about construction site safety regulations as they relate to construction site stairways, ladders, fall protection. The goal here today is for everybody attending to come away with a better understanding of these basic principles, so that if you have a case as an attorney, perhaps, for example, early on in the case, your client would come to you while you still have the opportunity to possibly look at the equipment or look at the construction site or direct him or her to photograph certain aspects of it. So this is just a very basic program, but will certainly allow you to have a much better understanding of what to expect. So let's get started here. Fall protection. Falls in construction are the leading cause of deaths in the construction industry. I do a lot of construction accident work, and a lot of that has to do with construction workers who have fallen. We'll be working on various conditions that require the use of fall protection and the options available. Just a couple of goals here, what you'll be able to take away with regards to your knowledge. Fall protection options. Number one would be a personal fall arrest system. When you hear that somebody is tied off, what that means is that they are wearing a harness and they are tied to a tie-off point with a lifeline that's fastened to the harness. And these are usually used at fairly significant heights. That's called the Personal Fall Arrest System, PFAS. There are certain very specific guidelines with regards to the condition of the vest, the inspection of the vest, or the harness, the amount of strength of the tie-off point, and so on and so forth. Another fall protection option, of course, is guardrails, temporary guardrails, as you can see in this middle photograph here. I have it right here. And you see this on every construction site. There's a top rail, a mid rail, and a toe board. The toe board is meant to prevent, if you have a tool lying or a piece of material lying right here, to prevent that from being accidentally kicked off and thus falling over the edge. Safety nets, of course, are also used at fairly significant heights. You see those on construction projects quite often. These guys are tied off. They're wearing a harness, and they're tied off to a point over here via these ropes. So if they slip and fall and fall over the edge, they'll be protected. That's an example of a harness. Training is necessary: how to put it on, how to fasten it, basically how to use it, where to tie it off to, make sure that it's strong enough point to withstand the downward force. This is a safety line. Must be independent of the platform anchorage and capable of supporting at least 5,000 pounds per worker. This is a retractable lifeline, so as he goes up and down, he doesn't have a continuous loop that he could trip over. So this is a self-retracting type system here. Guardrails, of course, around openings, stairways, skylights on a flat roof, open edges, floor edges are necessary. The top rail between 39 and 45 inches up off the floor. Mid rail, of course, and the toe board, as I just explained, is necessary 3.5 inches high or more to prevent materials or tools from accidentally being kicked over the edge and landing on somebody's head. This top rail must be capable of withstanding 200 pounds of lateral force. Lateral, of course, meaning left to right. Safety net, placed as close as possible. What that means is as close as possible to the working area, but no more than 30 feet below where the employees are working. Fall protection is required, as an example, on these various circumstances. Walkways and ramps. Have a stair railing here, a ramp railing. You can't really see it very well, but there's a toe board right here, a mid rail, and an upper rail. Residential fall protection on residential construction. The OSHA regulations vary slightly from commercial to residential. Residential is typically low rise, from 1 to maybe 3 stories. So with regards to fall protection, residential is a little different, but the same basic principles apply. If you can fall more than 6 feet, then you need fall protection. Not necessarily a harness. A harness with a lifeline isn't going to do a whole heck of a lot of good at such a low level. By the time you stretch to the end of that lifeline, wearing the harness, you could very easily hit the ground. So basically, typically in residential construction, what you're going to see is fall protection in the form of handrails and guardrails, primarily. Safety nets, again, can't put a safety net at such a low level. By the time the net extends to its lowest point, you're going to hit the ground while you're within the net. So this is a good example. I don't know how high up this worker is. Could be at a very significant height, and he's working right along this unprotected edge here. Again, another good example. What they've done here is they've tied this nylon rope to this rebar here, and called it good. Well, obviously that could very easily fail. Looks like somebody already went falling through this one. This is a skylight on the roof of a commercial building, flat roof. Now this must be protected. It says here this opening could be made safe by using a guardrail or strong cover. A guardrail could be placed around here, but that's somewhat impractical. You know, this is a finished roof. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing here. They could be re-roofing it, but to build a guardrail system around this little skylight would be impractical. So what are the other options to protect this opening? Well, you could obviously the skylight's going to be replaced. Take this cover off. There's just screws here that you can unscrew to remove that cover, and then you could put planks with a piece of plywood nailed to the top and secured in such a way where it doesn't become laterally displaced, and that would be considered adequate fall protection for a situation like this. This is a good example of an improperly covered opening. It's almost properly covered, but what they should have done is taken it to the next level and at least placed a piece of plywood over these, nailed to these planks, or put these planks closer together with straps perpendicular to them, thus nailing them together and preventing them from becoming, separated from each other. So this is better than nothing, but it certainly is still lacking. Concrete forms and rebar. Personal fall arrest systems when working on formwork or rebar. These guys, in this particular photograph, I'm not sure if it does not look to me as though they're tied off. And when they say to cover or cap the protruding rebar, what that means is, it's not shown in this photograph, but down below here, there could be other concrete forms or footings down at a lower level, and so you can imagine you've got all these pieces of rebar sticking straight up, and these are only, say maybe half an inch to 3/4 of an inch in diameter, so it's like a bunch of daggers sticking up out of the concrete below you. So if you fall on those, then you can become impaled with one. So what you do is you cover them properly so that if in fact somebody falls on one, yes, they'll get hurt, but they may not necessarily suffer fatality. They have these caps, if you see on a construction site, pieces of rebar sticking up out of the concrete that have an orange-colored cap on them. That is a plastic cap that is used to effectively increase the diameter of the rebar just temporarily, so that if anybody falls on it, they're not falling on something that is as thin as the rebar itself is. Well, I did a very good job explaining that. Move on here. Excavations. You wouldn't think that fall protection is necessary on something that's underground, but it is. Some of these excavations are very deep. This edge should be protected. Somebody could easily fall in that. Usually people think of fall protection as up above the ground. Not necessarily true. This is a residential construction site. You can see this worker here is tied off. You can see his lifeline here. He's tied off to a point up here on the roof. Again, if you can fall more than 6 feet, then you must have some sort of fall protection. Wall openings. Again, you've got an opening here. This could easily be, anywhere from 6 or 8 feet up above the ground to as high as, 16 or 18 feet or more, there should be a guardrail right across this opening, a top rail, a mid rail, and a toe board. Good work practices: perform work at ground level if possible. Well, obviously you're not going to roof at ground level. However, in this example, building prefab roofs on the ground and lifting into place with a crane. Tether or restrain workers so they can't reach the edge. That's not always practical either. I've worked for many, many years on a construction site, and you really need to be able to get to every square inch of the work area. So to tether somebody so they can't reach the edge is not real practical. Safety monitors, designate and use safety monitors, meaning somebody basically stands there and monitors everybody. That's not practical either. That costs money. Of course, conventional fall protection. The most conventional, most practical fall protection is going to be guardrails. In this example here, building prefab roofs on the ground, what they're talking about is roof trusses, say wooden roof trusses that typically would go on top of the walls individually. You can actually assemble the roof. I've seen this done. I've done it myself on the ground with many trusses spaced accordingly, usually 24 inches on center, and you can effectively build sections of the roof and lift them into place with a crane so that each truss does not have to be individually placed. Again, that all depends on site conditions. It depends on lots of different factors. Training, of course, is very important with regards to any sort of construction safety standards. A lot of people think that climbing a ladder or whatever it may be doesn't really require any training. Well, it does. So the primary goals of training your workers is teaching them how to recognize hazards, which can occur very quickly, and how to minimize those hazards, and also train them in the proper use of the equipment, the proper installation of a harness, lifeline, guardrails, and that kind of thing. So training is a big one. I do a lot of cases where the worker has received absolutely no training whatsoever, and sometimes they do some pretty careless things as a result. So to summarize the fall protection segment of this presentation, again, you can fall more than 6 feet, you must be protected. Typically, you're going to use fall protection on walkways, ramps, open sides and edges. What they mean here is floors, holes from skylight stairways, concrete forms, excavations, and so on. And the main sources or main types of fall protection are guardrails, covers, safety nets, and the personal fall arrest systems, aka a harness and a lifeline. So I think at this point we should probably take some questions on that segment of the presentation.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, David. We do have a couple questions in the queue already, and for all the attendees out there, if you do have a question, please use the chat or Q&A feature found on the right-hand side of the screen to submit your question. David, Alexander asks, is there any particular material for guardrails that is considered the safest for usage?
Considered the safest? I'm not sure. I know that the most practical is typically going to be wood. I mean, if it's a temporary guardrail, then it's not going to be made out of metal because it's much more difficult and time-consuming to fasten together just to have to take it apart later on. So, the only temporary guardrails that I've seen are wood, and as long as they're constructed by somebody who's trained, by a competent person, then they're going to meet those regulations. So to answer the question, really all you're going to see is wood. Any other material you're going to see might be metal, but again, that would be very impractical. So I would think that the wood is probably the safest because of its practicality.
Okay, excellent. We have a question here from Ashley who asks, is fall protection required for heavy machinery, such as a large rock or water trucks, if they're trying to get in the cab of the vehicle and the cab is over 6 feet from the ground?
Oh, that's an interesting question. And I'm not so sure that I can answer it. What we're dealing with here, and what I deal with, is fall protection on the construction site relative to the construction of the building itself. I've certainly been on many pieces of heavy equipment, and I've climbed up there. I've seen pieces of equipment that have, railings and of course steps that provide the worker with proper access in and out of the vehicle, but I don't know of any regulations that will, not to say that there are none, that relate to that specific topic. I can look into that, but that's about the best answer that I have at the moment.
Okay, excellent. We have a question here from James who asks, who's responsible for providing the fall protection? Is the subcontractor under any obligation for fall protection that would be needed by an employee of another subcontractor? So how are those lines drawn on who's responsible for putting up the fall protection?
Well, clearly the employer. For example, most construction sites are going to be what they call a multi-employer site. So you have say a general contractor who's got a framing contractor out there, and let's say the roofing subcontractor is out there at the same time. The roofing subcontractor's employee, which is typically not going to be the general contractor because roofs are typically subbed out to a subcontractor, but the subcontractor is responsible for providing their employees with proper safety measures. However, under OSHA regulations, the general contractor, or what they call the prime contractor, is never fully relieved of their obligation. So, in other words, if you see a construction site and you've got a general contractor who's subcontracting out the framing and or the roofing of the building, then and the general contractor sees that the subcontractor's employees are not properly protected, then clearly he or she also has the responsibility to make sure that in fact they are, by any number of measures, by providing the proper fall protection method themselves, or by stopping them from working until such time as their employer provides them with the proper fall protection, which, again, you have to realize that construction sites are busy places. These guys are trying to get this stuff done fast. So nobody's going to stop work. And if it's a very hazardous situation, then I'd like to think that they would. But the primary concern is typically getting it done, not necessarily worker safety.
Okay, we have 2 more questions, and then we'll move on to the rest of the content, David. Scott asks, I understand that employers have a role in providing fall protection training, but what roles do the trade unions have to provide training as well?
Trade unions typically have their own set of regulations. You have to understand, and their own safety manuals, as do a lot of construction companies. However, those manuals, of course, have to comply with regulations. I don't have a lot of experience as a union guy, I've handled cases that involved union workers, but OSHA is a federal regulation, and then states, for example, have their own industrial codes, and then unions also have their own safety standards. Can't comment too specifically on it because it's a subject that I'm not as familiar with as I could be, but my experience suggests that the union guidelines for safety are oftentimes stricter than other state or federal regulations. Obviously, the unions' primary goal is to protect their workers. So unions will typically offer training as part of to their membership, as will associations like the Home Builders Association, which I'm a part of, will offer training and so on and so forth. So.
Okay, excellent. And just one last question, and we'll continue on with the presentation. James asked a follow-up question to the one regarding the lines of responsibility for setting up the fall protection systems. Are there specific OSHA provisions that control the line of responsibility that you're aware of?
Yeah, in 29 CFR, CFR, of course, meaning Code of Federal Regulations, which is OSHA. 1926 is the chapter that deals with construction regulations, and in the beginning of that, there's a section, Rules of Construction, and there's a paragraph or two in there with regards to the various responsibilities of on a multi-employer, what they call a multi-employer job site. And that's where you'll see that the general contractor is never fully relieved of their obligation or their responsibility. So it's in a section that it could be in other sections as well, but the one that comes to mind is the one entitled Rules of Construction, is where you'll find that.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, David. I don't see any other questions in the queue, so why don't we continue on with the presentation?
Okay. So that first half essentially dealt with fall protection. Now we get into stairways and ladders. So let's get going on that. Hazards are quite obvious. Stairways and ladders obviously cause many injuries and fatalities. I've handled some cases where one case that comes to mind, the guy fell about 6 or 8 feet on a construction site in Manhattan. He really got hurt. So it doesn't take much. If this guy fell right now, he could really suffer an injury, even though he's only maybe 6 or 7 feet up off the ground. And you also have to realize, and I've been asked this question before, are people tied off when they're using a ladder? Well, the answer is no. I mean, unless they're up high and they're using a ladder to go from one level to another, and that lower level is still considerably high up off the ground. I mean, if you've got a guy who just shows up with an extension ladder, you can't tie off because you have to get to the bottom of the ladder. If you're tied off and the lifeline is long enough to allow you to get to the bottom of the ladder, well, then that lifeline's not going to do you a whole heck of a lot of good, you know. So ladder, that's one of the reasons why ladders are so dangerous. You fall off a ladder, you're not tied off. You're gonna hit the ground. Period. So again, at the end of this training, you should be able to list or describe safety guidelines with regards to stairways and safe practices for the use of ladders. When is a ladder or stairway required? This would be one floor level. This would be another floor level here. 19 inches or higher requires a ladder or some sort of step. Obviously, you're not going to use a 19-inch ladder, so there should be a little step in here. Okay, handrails versus stair rails. This is a handrail. It's mounted to the wall. you can grasp as you're ascending or descending the stairway. This picture doesn't show very well. This is a stair rail system that would be mounted to the outer edge of this stairway to prevent somebody from falling off. So, handrail, once again, must be capable of withstanding 200 pounds of lateral pressure. So if you've got a construction worker or two that happen to fall against it, it will hopefully hold them up. Stairways with 4 or more risers, each one of these vertical, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, plus this first one, essentially 6 rises, or higher than 30 inches must be equipped with at least one handrail. Stairrails. Again, both sides of this stairway are not guarded at all, and the stair rail system essentially would be fastened to the outer edge on each side of this stairway. He could be 2 or 3 stories up right now. He could be certainly high enough up off the ground to cause some severe injury. And you also have to realize that on a construction site, there's tools all around. There's air hoses. There's extension cords. As a matter of fact, I see one here and maybe one right here that you can easily trip over. Building materials all over the place. It's not just a stairway. It's a construction site. It's a stairway on a construction site, essentially is what it is. Okay, now, uniform, 30 to 50 degree angles. So no less than 30, no greater than 50 degree angle for the stairway. And by uniform, what they mean, and they say right here, no more than 1/4 of an inch variation. What that means is that let's say this vertical rise here measures, say, 7.5 inches, and this one measures, say, 7 1/4 inches, and then the next one that isn't drawn measures 7.5 inches. Well, it may not sound like much, but when you're using a stairway, and this applies to any stairway, not just a construction stairway, these are building codes as well. Although building codes, I believe, is 3/16 of an inch variation, but you can sort of ergonomically, from a human usage standpoint, it doesn't take much of a variation for you to kind of lose your balance a little bit. So that is why they can't vary much. You can lose your footing just by becoming accustomed to a certain height and then having it interrupted by yet another height. Temporary stairs only use pan stairs if they're filled with filler material. Now, what that means is this is most likely a commercial stairway. This is a horizontal stair tread that you step on, and this is shaped like a pan. It's got a side, a bottom, and then another side here. And this gets filled with concrete, and then it gets maybe tiled, or it gets painted, or there's different methods of finishing it off. But in the meantime, this is essentially an empty pan. I have a case right now that as a matter of fact, I just got the material on yesterday, where a worker was was walking down a pan stairway, and his toe got caught on this edge because it's sticking up. He was stepping into a pan that was not yet filled with anything, with concrete typically, and he tripped and he fell and he got hurt. Yeah, that was not me. Landings, stairway landings. Must be at least 30 inches deep and 22 inches wide every 12 feet or less of vertical rise. And that is so that the stairway isn't so long. So every 12 feet or less of vertical rise means that as you ascend or descend the stairway, there's a landing at least at 12 feet that you can stop and reposition or rest or whatever it may be. Unprotected sides of landings must have standard 42-inch guardrail systems. So if, in other words, if this concrete wall were not there, and if this concrete wall were not there, then you would have to have a guardrail here, made the same as what we've discussed before. As a matter of fact, they've got a little guardrail right in here, don't they, to protect that. But they don't, of course, they don't have, maybe it's not done yet, they don't have a railing on this side of the stairway, as hopefully they would. Okay, platforms and swing doors. You see construction site trailers with temporary platforms on the back and a stairway leading up. Those trailers are used for storing materials. The door swings open, or you see any number of different scenarios, and this is a standard that applies to that. 20 inches in here, so that you can stand, open the door, back up, get out of the door's way, whatever it may be, and have a place to stand without falling backwards at the top of that open edge there. Obviously, dangerous conditions. Somebody probably spilled some oil or something there. Housekeeping. Housekeeping is critical to a safe construction site. You have to keep it neat and tidy and in good condition. Ladders. Okay, here we go. General ladder requirements. Obviously, they must be safe, kept in a safe condition. Keep the area around the top and the bottom of the ladder clear. Ensure that rungs are what you step on right here. Cleats and steps are level and uniformly spaced, 10 to 14 inches apart, and keep them free from slipping hazards. Use ladders only for their designed purpose. I have seen guys use a ladder as a plank, which is not what it's designed for by any stretch. A horizontal plank with like a 2x12 sitting within it. Definitely not designed for that. I've seen workers use a ladder. I don't think that's what they're using this for, but I've seen them use a ladder as a scaffold. So they'll set up a ladder, one on the left, one on the right, run a plank in between the two. That is a no-no. Obviously, don't tie ladders together to make them longer. Don't use single rail ladders, and don't load ladders beyond the maximum load for which they were built. And by the way, there's a label that you'll see on the sides of ladders that gives their rating, which indicates the maximum load that they're designed for. Securing the ladders, you secure them at the top and the bottom, if possible. This ladder is not on a stable surface. This ladder, it's hard to see either end. It's not a very good photograph, but it looks to me as though it's just setting in the dirt. That dirt could be compacted on one side and loose on another. I've seen that happen many times, and it can cause the distribution of weight on one side of the ladder to cause that rail to press further down into the ground, thus causing it to move at the top laterally, which once you extrapolate that can be considerable. Portable ladders, inspect before use. You'd be surprised how often that does not happen. Let's see here. This is an example of a double cleated ladder. This is designed for two-way traffic on a commercial construction site. So basically, you can have a worker going up one side of the ladder and then down the other side of the ladder. Painting wood ladders. Do not paint ladders. Why is that? Paint conceals defects. So you do not paint ladders. You do not paint wooden planks. Paint can also cause them to be slippery. But primarily, you don't want to hide any defects. If a piece of wood is split and therefore structurally compromised, then that split or defect can easily be covered by paint. Naturally, you don't want that. The angle of a ladder is also critical, not only to prevent it from slipping out and becoming displaced on the bottom if it's on too steep of an angle, but also because the strength, the greater distance the bottom of the ladder is away from the building, if it were out here somewhere and on a much lesser angle, as you place the load on that ladder, it obviously is more apt to bend and to break. So basically, for every 4 feet out, you can be 16 feet up. So it's a 1 to 4 ratio. The top of the ladder also is to extend above the work surface so that the worker can climb up, step off, and be able to still have something to grasp onto when he or she is stepping onto this elevated platform here. Okay, so this is a fixed ladder, which you typically don't see used on a construction site. This is a ladder that's used for maintenance on an existing building, and you see these all over the place. Again, a ladder safety device, self-retracting lifelines, a cage or a well, which is what this is. Each section not exceeding 50 feet. So this goes up, maximum 50 feet. There's a platform here. The worker can stop, rest, reposition, whatever, and so on and so forth. Your energized electrical equipment. This is a big one too, and you see this all the time. A lot of electrical lines leading to buildings, high tension lines, are not sheathed. They're bare copper. If you take a close look, you'll see that there is no sheathing around those electrical lines at all. So if you come in direct contact with or even fairly close to one of those lines, you can get electrocuted if you're using a ladder that conducts electricity. I had a construction site a few years ago that was surrounded by private property, and the power to that property was delivered to the property via above ground electrical lines that were fairly antiquated, but they were fairly old, and they came fairly close to the house that we were building, probably maybe 10 or 12, 14 feet away, and it was just a bare copper line. There's no rubber or plastic sheathing around these lines at all. So what I had to do was I had to get a private utility company out there to cover the lines. You've seen maybe on the side of the road, you've seen these orange covers that are covering the line, and that is for that reason. It's meant to be a temporary cover because we were planning on using metal scaffolds and aluminum ladders and whatnot on that end of the building. So when they project, say 3 feet, 2 to 3 feet out from the building itself, and the uncovered electrical line is only say 10 or 12 feet, well, that puts the worker within and the scaffold within possibly 7 or 8 feet from that electrical line. I've got a case also in New Hampshire where They were building a commercial building near some high tension lines that ran right along the edge of the property, and the worker was helping install very long pieces of sheet metal roofing. He was on one end, his coworker was on the other end. A gust of wind came along and blew it, and his coworker lost his grip while he still maintained his grip and blew the end of the sheet metal roofing right onto that high tension line, and he was electrocuted. The electricity came in his left arm and exited his body through his right arm, and literally blew his right forearm off of his arm on exiting. So this stuff is not anything to mess around with by any means. A lot of guys take it for granted because it doesn't look dangerous, but it most certainly is. Move on, top step. Never step on the top step of the ladder, as this man's doing. Not much time we got here. Cross-bracing. Don't use cross-bracing on the rear of the step ladder for climbing unless the ladder is designed for that. You can see this ladder, the back rungs are designed for use. That means that they're designed to step on, as opposed to a thinner metal that you might see back in this direction, meaning it's just a one-sided ladder. This is a two-sided ladder, meaning that you can use either side of it. Obviously, this is not a good idea. I'm missing a rung here. So a competent person must inspect ladders for visible defects. If the ladder is found, if a defective ladder is found, immediately mark it or tag it. Do not use until such time as it's repaired. Oftentimes, in these cases, if it's a defective ladder, then the ladder mysteriously disappears. Is nowhere to be found. Climbing the ladder sounds like pretty basic stuff here, but still, guys make mistakes. I've seen them go down the ladder facing out. Always go up or down the ladder facing in, using one hand to grab the ladder, and don't carry any object that could cause you to lose balance. Well, that's not real practical. I've climbed up ladders many times with a bundle or two of roofing shingles on my shoulders, and those weigh probably 30 or 40 pounds each, so that's not always practical. Training. A competent person must train each employee in the following areas as applicable. Nature of fall hazards in the work area. Correct procedures for erecting, maintaining, and disassembling the fall protection systems to be used. Proper construction, use, placement, and care in handling of all stairways and ladders. The maximum intended load carrying capacities of ladders. All right, to summarize ladders, to summarize stairways. The treads, what you step on, railings in the form of a handrail, a stair rail, or a guardrail, the landings and platforms. Ladder safety, competent person must inspect, use the correct ladder for the job. Correct angle supports treads, cross braces, and rails. Naturally, don't overload, and your employer must train you in the proper use of a ladder. And that is slide number 56, and that is the end of our stairway and ladder presentation. So, Matt, if we could get to some questions, and if you have to answer them.
Excellent. Thank you so much, David. We do have a couple questions in the queue, and to all the attendees, like with the last question and answer break, if you do have a question for David, please use the Q&A or chat feature found on the right-hand side of the screen to submit your questions. We have a question from Jason who asks, what protections should be used by an individual installing the protective devices? For example, is there recourse for an individual injured while installing a rail on an open side of a platform?
Could you repeat that again, please, Matt?
Sure. I apologize. I probably went through it too quickly.
No, that's okay.
What protections should be used by an individual installing the fall protection devices? For example, is there recourse for an individual injured while installing a rail on an open side of a platform?
Yes. Obviously, if you've got a work site or an open edge of a platform that is not protected yet, somebody has to go up there and install a guardrail. So that person would be monitored. Obviously, they would be trained, and that's what's called a controlled access zone, which means that the access to that area is controlled and monitored by a competent person. So let's say you have an open edge of a floor that's the third floor of a building with an unprotected edge, then you would have somebody go up there and install the guardrail system, and they would be monitored by a competent person. So until such time as that guardrail is installed, the access to that area is limited and controlled. The worker who's actually putting that system, that guardrail system in place, at that time would most likely be tied off with a harness and a lifeline.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, David. Throughout your presentation, you mentioned the term competent person. Can you go over, just as for review, what OSHA defines as a competent person?
OSHA's definition of a competent person is actually quite simple, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's somebody who through the proper training and experience is capable of recognizing and correcting a hazard. So a competent person is somebody who would typically be OSHA certified, which of course I am. I've got my OSHA 10 and my OSHA 30. 10 is residential. 10 hours is what that means. 30, meaning 30 hours of classroom training, is for commercial. So a competent person is somebody who is capable of recognizing a hazard on the construction site. Okay,
excellent. We have another question here. Can a personal fall arrest system be used on a ladder?
No, typically not. Imagine, if you will, somebody coming along and using an extension ladder on a residential construction project that they have to get to the top of, or however high they need to get, and then get back down to the bottom of the ladder. Well, if they're tied off with a personal fall arrest system, a harness and a lifeline, then that lifeline would have to be long enough to allow them to get down to ground level. So if in fact they fell, it wouldn't do them any good. They've got to get to the bottom of the ladder. The only time you'll typically see a harness and a lifeline being used while somebody is using a ladder is if you've got a taller building with multiple levels, and let's say the worker is using a ladder to get to another level or to get to whatever he or she needs to get to. Well, they could very well be tied off, because even at the bottom of that ladder, they're still considerably high up off the ground. So it depends on the circumstance. But typically, when you're using a ladder, you're not going to be tied off, because again, you have to get to the bottom of the ladder, which is usually at ground level, and that lifeline therefore isn't going to do you much good.
Okay, excellent. We have a question here from Edward, which builds on a question that we took during the first Q&A session. Is the commercial general contractor responsible for ensuring fall protection is in use by subcontractors? And how does this obligation apply to the individual subcontractor owner, not his employee? What if the individual subcontractor is not OSHA trained? And the example Edward's speaking about has to do with fall protection on a roof.
The general contractor is never fully relieved of their responsibility to make sure that people are working safely, as per the rules of construction in 1926. Not the year, of course, but the chapter, I guess, is what it is, under 29 CFR. So the general contractor is responsible for his or her subcontractors and to make sure that their employees are working safely. People that are not regulated by OSHA are self-employed people. So, in other words, if a general contractor has subcontracted a roof to somebody who is self-employed, then that person is not subjected to the regulations under OSHA, but of course their employees would be. And if the general contractor sees that those employees are not being provided with proper fall protection, then the general contractor, him or herself, could very well be responsible if one of the roofing subcontractors' employees gets hurt and he knowingly allows that to occur. I hope that answers the question. But OSHA does not apply to the self-employed, to other workers that are regulated under other regulations, like, say, the mining industry, nor does it apply to immediate family members of agricultural companies. So the farmer's daughter, the farmer's son, that kind of thing. But everybody else out there in the workplace is regulated by OSHA, amongst other state, for example, state regulations.
Okay, excellent. And we'll have one more question here, possibly two. The first one comes from Ashley, who asks, do you know the authority for the premise that OSHA does not apply if MSHA applies? Sorry.
MSHA. You'll have to refresh my memory and tell me what MSHA is.
Okay, we'll get back to that question. Ashley, if you could, the mine safety.
Oh. Yeah, let's get back to that question and see if we can answer the other one real quick.
Okay, we'll get back to that question.
Yeah.
David, of the three things that you talked about, fall protection, ladders, and stairs, are there any emerging trends or accidents that are happening more frequently that you've seen in the last, say, year and a half, 2 years?
Not that I've seen. I know that OSHA changed the standard for residential fall protection within the last 6 months, and I can't quote that off the top of my head because it's not something that I've had to deal with. But I know that I am up to speed with regards to that kind of thing. Typically, the construction accidents that I've seen are pretty much, as far as trends are concerned, no, I haven't seen any. They're usually a lot of it has to do with somebody falling or using a power tool improperly. Get a lot of that, that kind of thing. But as far as trends are concerned, no, not that I'm aware of.
Excellent. We do have clarification from Ashley. going back to something you talked about, when OSHA does not apply, and you had referenced that in mining, OSHA does not apply. When OSHA doesn't apply, do you know the authority? Who has the authority, or what regulatory agency has the authority on the premise if OSHA doesn't apply? Does it default to?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know that question. I don't know the answer to that question. I know construction safety with regards to OSHA, but with regards to, and I know who is covered or regulated by OSHA when it comes to construction, but when it comes to certain other trades or occupations, I'm not really sure.
Okay. No, thank you so much.
Sorry, I can't answer that beyond that.
Not a problem. With that, we will conclude this afternoon's program. I want to thank David for the time and effort that he put into the presentation. You can tell that he knows OSHA. And I'd like to thank all who attended. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to spend with us this afternoon. If you'd like to speak to David about a case or matter that you're handling, you can call us here at TASA. The number is 800-523-2319. We'll be sending out the link to the archived recording of this webinar tomorrow morning. The archived recording of this webinar and all of our webinars can be found in the TASA Knowledge Center. If you go to tasanet.com, at the top of the screen you'll see a link for the Knowledge Center. Click on that, and you can easily find the full list of our webinars. If you have any questions or comments, we do take all of your comments under consideration, and they do help us to put on better programs. Please email me, mhyde@tasanet.com. You'll be getting a follow-up email from me at about 3:30 Eastern Time today. You can just reply to that email with any comments or questions that you may have. We look forward to seeing you at future TASA events. We have a webinar coming up on December 15th, and we have several planned for the new year. So we do look forward to seeing you at future TASA events. With that, I'm going to end this afternoon's webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.